So what is going on with all these old automakers who are being taken over by a brand that nobody knew about like 10 years ago? And suddenly this brand is being talked in many places. It's actually being the most sold brand in Europe in September 2021 and is leading the technology and the revolution in all the car automotive industry. Many car manufacturing companies are actually facing the risk of being replaced by companies like Tesla, companies that are actually trying to change the way that the industry is working or has been working for many, many years. The reality is that when you look at the automobile industry, it has not moved in practice much for many years. And only in the last 10 years actually has progressed a lot. And most of this progress actually comes because of Tesla. But what's going on? What's happening with Tesla that is actually roasting their competition? Let's go into it. So industry disruption happens, and it has happened in many other industries over time. And you probably are aware yourself of different examples, like when Apple came out with the iPhone and Nokia suddenly started to fade away. Or also with Netflix when it came to the market, initially just by the renting of DVDs, but also later on with created the streaming business. All these are disruptions that has happened in other industries, and it has changed completely the ecosystem of products and companies that are leading those markets. So now the question is, are we in the same situation with the automobile industry? So quickly, it pretty much looks like Tesla is taking a really long leap forward compared to all the other competitors, even to all these new startups that are coming in the automobile industry. In this video, I want to go through the reasons why these established old companies especially are going to have a lot of trouble when it comes to keeping up with a new disrupting company such as Tesla. So if you don't know me, I'm a product director in a tech company. I like to look at how products perform, how products should be working, and what are all the things that have to be taken into consideration when building products. I'm not going to say that I'm the best out there, that I'm the most expert, but I have been working in this industry for many years. So let's go through the reasons why products typically fail, and let's apply this into the automobile industry. So one of the typical things that you have to do when you look at a new product is do product discovery. And this means that you have to identify a potential need from users and a potential best solution for those users, and actually identify who are the user personas or the target groups that you are going to be selling to. This is what usually is called product discovery. If you fail at product discovery, most likely you are either identifying a wrong problem, you are either identifying the wrong solution, or you are building for the wrong target audience. A potential good example of this is, for example, Toyota, now looking towards building hydrogen cars. So as principle, the idea is not necessarily bad. It actually tackles the same problem that Tesla's cars are trying to tackle. It's trying to make a more environmentally friendly way of transportation. But the problem is that potentially this one has already somehow come too late, meaning that the problem, identifying a problem with the environment, and the solution, making a more environmentally friendly way of transportation, are potentially good. The problem is that possibly there is not enough people who are interested in this new technology. And this might be for many reasons. First of all, there's no infrastructure out there. Second, many people are already sold out by the value of just charging either in your house or in the superchargers or in whatever electric chargers that you might have in many places out there. So although potentially this could be a good idea, it might be that already now is a little bit too late. There's also the potential problem that there's no infrastructure out there to distribute the hydrogen for those cars, which makes it very difficult for people to actually find it compelling, because where am I going to find hydrogen? The second one is something that startups typically face at some point or another, is that at some point you had to pivot directions. This means that potentially you start with an idea of what you want to achieve, but at some point you identify that you are not going the right direction and you had to make a very big turn and start going in a different direction. You could argue that this is a case of failing at product discovery, which in a way it is. Pivot is something that is very normal that happens within startup companies, but it's something that very rarely happens in established companies. Only certain type of companies are used to this kind of behavior. Potentially most of them are usually the most modern tech companies, as you can think. For example, Fang, or is it Mang nowadays? I don't know, changing names is bad. But again, here you could see that potentially, again, and I don't want to pick up too much on Toyota Toyota is also one that is potentially failing at pivoting, at changing the direction. What has been happening with Toyota is that they have put a lot of effort in the plug-in hybrid technology. And although this is a transition technology which has been okay for a while, it is just a transition technology. It's not a solution typically on its own. So this is something that as a transition could be okay, but you had to move on in certain direction. And now it seems that Toyota is really having a hard time to pivot towards just purely electric vehicles. Although it's true, they have some that are in the pipeline, but it's not something that they have been promoting and driving very heavily. The next one is one that possibly many companies face at one point or another, especially when they try to adopt or create a new product that is very close to the product offering that they are having at some point. This happens obviously with cars, when you have a car that works, but then you have to replace that car by a new type of car that it also solves the same problem, but it's going to create internal competition between your own cars, which is a good and a bad thing. Typically here, what happens is that there is a fear of cannibalizing your own product offering. But there's a tough truth here, is that either you are the one yourself who is cannibalizing your own offering with the alternative offering that you're creating, so your gasoline vehicles, you're replacing with your electric vehicles and trying to move the money from one hand to another, or somebody else is going to cannibalize that for you, which is a sad situation, but it's the reality of what it is. And the problem is that for many of these companies, creating a gasoline car is not the same price as creating an electric car, because there's a lot of investment that is needed in order to get all those production lines in place, to do all the research, to actually get the knowledge to all the part that comes when it comes to electric batteries. But there's also the technology, and Tesla is not just about electric vehicles, it's also about the technology that they have behind. Robotaxis, full self-driving, autopilot, and so on are technologies that are way ahead any of those ones in their competitors. There are many examples out there in other industries of people or companies that have failed at this, and a sad example is Nokia, when it was the biggest player in the mobile phone arena or industry, and when the iPhone came, they just couldn't keep up with that change. So this is something that has happened before and will happen again in many different industries. We see this potentially happening in the future also with different cryptocurrency projects. The next big one that is coming to my mind is that many of these companies nowadays are having problems with keeping the focus. They're trying too hard to please all the markets and trying to say that they are doing cars that can support any kind of powertrain and they are going to work efficiently and they are going to be perfect in no matter what situation. The problem with this approach is that in reality what it sounds to me like what they're doing is that they're just trying to hack that all these gasoline cars that were building previously, now let's try to put electric engine there and it should just work. Yes, in practice it works, but in reality is that what you have is that you are lacking focus. You are not building a vehicle that it's meant for the purpose that you are thinking. So if you are trying to move towards an EV type of vehicle, you should really see how to build that and not just try to basically hack it into the other ones. That can work as a prototype, it can work as a POC, and this is exactly as Tesla started. But they did it one time, they proved the concept, and they move on. In this case, they just stay with the prototype as the production release version. And that has a problem in itself. Those cars, when you try to have cars that apply or that can be driven by many different powertrains, in reality is that what is that car better for, or which one is the focus of that car? That makes it very then difficult to have something that is going to work really well out of the box. There's many companies that are doing this. Some of them they have done it with a actually certain level of success, and some others with a little less success. Of course, you could say that Tesla did it and it worked very well for them. Others that have done it is Kia with the Niro and e-Niro models. And then also Stellantis Group with Peugeot has been doing it with the 2007 model as well. They have different versions of that model. But again, this is a problem when you try to have a car that it's one platform that fits all. It's always going to have trade-offs. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, as I said. but it's usually not a solution. It's not usually the best product that you are going to be able to get. On the other hand, when you think about Tesla, Tesla is just focusing. They just build the cars to be electric from the ground up. They don't have to bother with trying to compromise, which means that it's going to be difficult to compete with them because they're typically going to have better solutions because they are more tailored for the purpose that they have. The next one is that many companies, although they might have good ideas and they might have potentially even good plans, they might fail at execution. It's very easy to make plans. Well, maybe not that easy, but you can make a lot of plans, even good plans, but the reality is that making or driving execution is where you are going to spend most of your time. And you can probably relate to this if you were paying attention when they were trying to ramp up in Tesla the production of Model 3, they were talking about production hell. This is just product execution. And product execution, especially when you have to ramp up big time, it can get really tricky and really hard to achieve. And you can see that most of the companies, the new companies, like the new startups, are facing this problem, but also the established companies are facing this problem. Because no matter what they say, no matter what the resources they have are, the reality is that those resources in general are tied to the old business. They are not tied to the new business. When they are tied to the old business, it's very difficult to start to create those new factories to create electric vehicles. And the same happens with the startups. And you can also see this because many of these companies, when they announce the new models, the number of new units that they're promising that they're going to produce are relatively low compared to the size of their customer base. When they're selling millions of cars to users, suddenly they come with an electric vehicle that they talk that they are going to produce over the next year tens of thousands of that model. Of course, you can see the numbers and they don't match when you compare millions to tens of thousands. There's not going to be an offering that is going to replace the other one anytime soon. Here you can see that most of the legacy car manufacturers are having this kind of problem. They are having a tough time to start producing electric vehicles, and they are not committing very heavily in this direction. Except maybe some of them, like Volkswagen, you could argue that is trying harder than others. But as well, you can see this problem with product execution when it comes to startups. Rivian, for example, now they have just come out with their first car and now they are doing the first deliveries, but the first deliveries apparently are only to people that are working in the company and they are having tough time then to ramp up production. So again, another problem with product execution. Then the next one is that most of the companies are not trying to take advantage of the latest technology. So here Tesla is always trying to innovate, is always trying to change. It's not saying that, hey, we have a production line that works for Model Y or Model 3 or whichever model is, and we just have it running for several years, and then in some years we will change it and modify and update the model and change the way that we produce it. That's not what they do. They're modifying their production lines constantly to optimize as much as they can. You can see that they are coming with the Giga Press, these big presses that actually build large parts of the car to reduce the number of parts that have to be installed then later on in the car. Plus, of course, they're looking into all what is in that amazing screen that those Model 3 has, and that's just the visualization for you as a driver. But the reality, there's a ton of technology behind that. There's all the AI that they're using for them to build cars that can drive on their own, that can be much safer than other cars out there. And there's a lot of features that they are adding into those cars. Some of them they're more gimmicky, but hey, who doesn't like a laugh? And here you can see that most of the other companies don't have the same level of technology that Teslas are having at this point. Except, of course, when it comes to prototypes. But prototypes and demo models, like you can see sometimes from Mercedes, they look really beautiful, they look really cool, everybody wants one, but that's not a reality. That's not a car that is driving out there that you could purchase, and especially you could not purchase for a relatively affordable price. The next one is that most of these companies are not having a vertical integration. You can see that Tesla is actually trying to do everything on their own. Most of the other companies are working with third parties that are doing different components for their cars. This can be software, this can be chips, this can be whatever. It doesn't mean that Tesla does every single thing, but they do much more than the others do on their own. The problem when you have so many components that are manufactured in other places is that your vehicle is actually using common components that are used by many other cars. This is not necessarily a bad thing. Most of us and most of the products do that, but it has a downside to it. Those components are not optimized for the product that you're building. It is a much more costly approach to have a vertical integration, but when you have a vertical integration and you do it right, you have products that typically work really well on their own. Who else is doing this kind of approach? You can see in Apple. Apple, most of their products are also vertically integrated. They do most of the things on their own, which means that typically, for example, the hardware and the software are working really well together because they build the whole thing on their own. Yes, some small components might not be their own, but most of it is actually their own. This you can see with the common PCs, yes, okay, they always have troubles and more trade-offs than Apple's will have. This is said by somebody that is not a huge Apple fanboy, I had to admit. But the reality is that all these other car manufacturers are actually using a ton of components that are built for generic purposes. There is one thing that probably is, in a way, the root cause for all these problems, which is company culture. Company culture usually is the approach of the company to behave in certain ways and typically behave regularly on a similar ways. You could say that there are the processes, is the mentality, how the company reacts and behaves like in different kind of situations. So it's usually what is in the back of the bone, of the brain of the company. The reality is that company culture is not an easy thing to handle, and especially when it comes to tech companies, you need a very innovative and willing to learn and willing to understand failure. That's something that is not probably very common in a traditional car manufacturing company. So company culture is probably the biggest problem that especially the existing car manufacturers are having when it comes to compete with somebody like Tesla. Because Tesla comes with a completely new approach, completely new ways of working, very modern, very innovative, very much of try and fail approach that is very much used in many startups out there. So they understand, for example, the principles of Agile, they understand design thinking, they understand all these things. Whereas probably in the other companies, this sounds like things like, what? Agile? What? So I might be completely wrong, but if things don't change, or if these good old companies don't change the way of working, they are going to be roasted by Tesla. Or Tesla and other companies that are coming in the future. This might be Lucid, it might be Rivian. It's not very clear at this point which ones are the next ones that are going to be big in this space. Well, there's all the Chinese ones. I'm pretty sure that there's some big one coming out of there, NIO for example. And yes, I might be proved wrong, and probably there's going to be some of these legacy automakers that are going to make it. But it's not going to be an easy journey, and potentially they're not going to be the kings and the big guys that they used to be in the past. Probably this is going to change quite a bit. And the top 10, the top 20 car manufacturers list is going to be very different from now in 10 years. At least that's my opinion. Sometimes when watching videos in YouTube, many times I see that people are just talking about companies getting roasted. Yes, I said that here. But the reality is that companies typically don't just crash and burn in a massive explosion like happens in Hollywood. They usually fade away slowly but surely over the years. And yes, there's going to be customers that will continue purchasing their products, but the reality is that this is going to be a smaller and smaller percentage over the years. So if you are watching this video in 5, 10, 15 years from now, leave a comment below and update us with the list of which ones are the biggest car manufacturers at that point. Or do we have cars anymore? If you like this type of content, please like and subscribe, it helps a lot with the YouTube algorithm. If you want to see how to build successful products or how modern tech companies work, go and check some other of my videos. I will see you in the next one, and remember, stay safe.